Most producers think their tracks don't sound professional because something's wrong with their mix. But after working with over 400 producers, I've seen a clear pattern. The biggest mixing issues actually come from choosing bad samples to begin with. So in this video, I'm going to show you exactly what makes a sample sound good or bad, the biggest red flags you need to watch out for so you can spot bad samples within seconds, and why fixing this one thing can make your mixes sound 10 times better. So in this session, I've prepared examples of the biggest red flags you definitely need to avoid if you want to save your mixes. Now, the first one that I'm about to show you is specifically tricky, and it has ruined more mixes than you might believe. So I'll play this for you and you try to spot the error. Now, you might have heard in a lot of tutorials that using short kicks is actually a good thing because in your mix that is going to make a lot of room for the bass, it's going to make the kick snappy and actually be able to punch through. But that is exactly what a lot of people get wrong about kick drums. Let's take a look at this kick drum using Prism. Now, I'll slow this down for you. Now, what you will hear and see is that this kick drum is actually peaking at around 50 Hz, which is super low. Now, in theory, with just looking at this frequency plot, you might expect a kick drum that actually has a lot of body and a lot of ring to it. But the problem is they artificially shortened that kick drum so that this couldn't even ring out properly. Now that results in a kick drum that is on the one hand stealing a bit of your headroom because it actually is quite low, but on the other hand, since it cannot really ring out, it doesn't create the low end movement that you actually want to feel. So you have to be really careful with this advice that's floating around on YouTube to use short kick drums, even if you've seen some legendary producers like Skrillex or deadmau5 recommend this type of thing. The reason they make this recommendation is because it works specifically in the context of how they've designed the song, and they would be really wary of a situation like this. Now, ideally in your song, you would pick the perfect kick and bass combination that works together, that is not fighting for headroom, where they actually support each other and where they work in tandem also rhythmically in a way that overall creates the groove in the song. And so you can never pick a kick sample completely in isolation, and you can never design a bass patch completely in isolation. So I recommend you always try out combinations of those two and then design what's right for your song. So this one was relatively easy to spot, but I bet you will not find out what the problem with the next one is. So here's a cymbal, listen to that. It's actually not sounding that bad, right? So you might be thinking, yeah, it has a little bit of a weird panning going on. Maybe it is a bit overprocessed, who knows? But that's not the problem here. Let me zoom in and I'll show you the issue that literally kills the groove in your production. Take a look at this. Why the hell is a one-shot sample starting late? And you won't believe how many samples that you buy from like big companies have this issue. This happens with kick drum samples, this happens with cymbals, like in this case, with hi-hats, with claps, with everything. I've encountered this issue so many times, and this is just because there was no quality control going on when they exported the final samples. So whenever you grab a sample from any sample pack, make sure to take a close look if the starting position is actually 0. So in this case, it's particularly obvious. Yeah, there's like a lot of room there, but sometimes, let's take a kick drum for example. If you have a kick drum that starts just a little bit late, this already would result in a really weird sounding groove, and your low end will just not hit hard because the kick drum has a slight delay. Would create phase issues. If you have, for example, a rolling bass line at the same time, you might get this strange flanging comp filtered sound, or just layering the kick drum with another one would never work because they're just slightly out of phase. So my recommendation, if you have a sample that you like the sound of, but you encounter that it has this issue, you simply delete that beginning. You make sure that it's actually starting at the 0 position, then you export it and load it into your sample library and delete the other file so that you will never have that problem without noticing it. Since we don't just work with one-shot samples, but sometimes we also throw in a loop, let me show you problems that can occur with just a simple beat like this. So there's no problem with the frequency content. There is also no problem with the timing. Actually, the groove is quite nice. But the issue here is that there's no transient left whatsoever. If we zoom in here, you can already see it. Like this is like heavily compressed and clipped off. So very, very over processed. And the reason you don't want something like this in your library is if it's already so compressed and has such little transient information, there's no way you can create a mix that actually jumps out of the speakers. It will remain flat whatsoever. And this is just because your original sample choice was so bad. Now, even if I try to use something like a transient designer to kind of pull out transients, it's just just not going to work. Now, these days, there are some really fancy processing tools, sometimes using AI to kind of recover transit information that maybe was there before, but that is complete overkill for your session. This rips you out of the creative flow. So definitely pick samples that have like a natural transit information still available. If they're a little bit compressed, it's perfectly fine, but you don't want something like this. Now, this next one will sound specifically weird on headphones. Listen to this. So I mean, this is really cool sound design, let's be honest. So these glitchy sounds, they can be really desirable for a specific production if you want that. But the issue here is that they're completely out of phase. So left channel and right channel are completely out of phase. There's like slight differences, which is why it's not completely canceling out or like collapsing to mono. But here you can see that this is a huge issue. You can spot this by looking at a correlation meter. So here on the BX meter, you can see that the correlation, this is the correlation meter here. If it's between 0 and +1, there's a positive correlation between the channels. And if it's between 0 and closer to -1, then this correlation is negative. So this is an easy way to spot something like this. So why is this a problem? First of all, if you collapse this to mono, sounds like this, the loop almost disappears. But that isn't even the biggest issue, because most cases we listen to something still on stereo. But a lot of people actually listen on headphones, and this is where you get this feeling of nausea and it's really messing with your head. And these type of counter-phasing elements in your production, they have a ripple effect. So it's not only concerning this specific element, but it might also be a problematic thing with other elements that it's in relation with. So you just never want something that's completely out of correlation in your production like this. Now, for this last example, I've picked something particularly tricky, and I'm curious to hear if you can spot it. Okay, frequency content. I mean, it's kind of what you would expect from a sequence like this, quite mid-rangey. Let's check if there are any phase issues. Looks super healthy. Now, timing-wise, that's also fine. Sample starting quite as you would expect it. So what's the issue here? Yes, it is maybe a little bit of a process, but that is not the real issue here. So this is going to give some of you a hard time. If you pick a sample like this, that sounds quite cool actually, and you use that as it is in your session, what you're essentially doing is you're ripping yourself the opportunity to develop your own sound, because this is super opinionated. This sequence, like, you can almost not use it in a real session because it already dictates the direction so much that you are following the artistic intention of whoever created that sequence, and that is not your own intention. Now, I'm definitely not against using samples or even pre-made loops like this one, but you would have to work super hard to turn that into something that you can actually own. And I'm not talking about legal problems. I'm literally talking about using this and standing behind creatively as an artist. Now that you know what the biggest red flags are, let's talk a little bit about how to actually identify a really good sounding sample. What makes them be so different and work well in your session? Before we get to that, if you struggle with finishing songs, then I have something for you. It's called the Finisher Framework. It's my free guide. It will help you get to one great sounding song per month easily. You can get it at pickyourself.com/framework. The link is also in the description. On contrast to all the shitty samples we just listened to, let me play a full groove of unmixed material. So this is completely blank, just using great samples in my opinion. So what specifically works and why did I let this stuff into my secret weapon sound library? Let's first of all talk about the kick here. The interesting thing here is this kick sample has enough transit information, but it also has enough body, which means I could mangle this in very different ways. I could compress it like crazy, I could distort it like crazy, I could make it a short kick drum, I could extend the tail of the kick drum. So it lets me go into very different directions. It's almost like a blank slate that I can use for many different applications. Now let's be honest, this already has a little bit of processing baked into this, but it's just the right amount of processing that gives me good starting points. Even if I do nothing to this, it already sounds quite good. If you use a kind of mediocre 909, 808 sample from a lot of libraries, they will often have potential, but you have to already do a lot of processing to get them to a decent level. Now let's move to the hi-hat. Now, as you can see with the sample here, this already is quite compressed, limited, so it's not completely clean, but still it once again has a nice tail to it. I could soften it a little bit. I could even compress it harder or saturate it, and it would still work. So let me just show you. If I throw a saturator on this, it doesn't sound overprocessed right away. So I could still drive it quite a bit. I'm pushing this 33 dB now into the saturator, and it still kind of has a realistic sound to it, or where I can define the color that it actually has. And this is what a good sample always allows you. A good sample allows you to push the processing quite extensively, first of all, before it kind of collapses. If I try something like this with a sample from above, like it's immediately sounding completely weird. Now, sometimes I actually like using percussion loops, but they sound a little bit more like this. And they're not the kind of loops that are really in your face and take a prominent role. They're more like for creating a backbeat, and they are not too opinionated. So this is a loop that could work in a lot of different genres. It is not specifically made by someone with already like a very clear vision. And so I try to kind of have them sitting a bit more in the back of my production. I very often also process them heavily. So this is still completely clean, but I could take this in a million different directions. Now you might be wondering, why is Philip using these Atmos here that already are quite opinionated and have a certain direction? So let me play them for you. Now, the reason I like these types of Atmos is because they already set the stage and create a certain mood for me to then get inspired and find the right kind of lead sound that works in my session. It just helps me bridge that emotional gap, that connection between myself and the music, where I try to find something in my very initial loop stage. I try to get to a point where something actually resonates with me on a very deep emotional level quite early on. Now, it's really hard to come up with a super inspiring lead sound if you just have a kick and a hi-hat. I mean, you could process the kick and the hi-hat and sound in specific ways to already give you some direction, but it very often helps to have some kind of a bed of ambience or music or a bit of texture that actually already goes into a direction. Now, I use opinionated atmospheric pads and stuff for me to do this, but very often later on in the process I actually delete them and replace them with my own custom made pads that create an even stronger emotional connection. But it just helps me get over this first hump. Now, I would still say that there's nothing wrong with using like Atmos like this, because in the end no one will remember your track specifically just because of that thing. That is going to be something that's floating in the background. What they will remember is how you actually arrange your track, what the lead element is all about, and this will sit in the background and maybe support everything a little bit. So I don't even think that it's that big of a deal if you use something like this, even as it is. So now you know exactly how to spot bad samples and what makes up good samples, but this is worth absolutely nothing if you have no idea how to actually design really good sounding lead elements by yourself. So make sure to watch that video next, in which I show exactly what frameworks the pros use to get to unique sounding synths.